that little bracket that's coming out. It's a red cable that comes out and loops onto the gear shifter lever, basically. That has to just simply get pulled off that lever, and then that cable will be free. And there is that gear shift cable that was disconnected, still attached to the instrument cluster. And now I was able to pull that instrument cluster forward, and there are some plugs on the back side of it that just need to be pulled out, and then this instrument cluster will be completely out. And now with all the plugs pulled from the back of the instrument cluster is completely out. And all of these black fittings on the back are actually the bulb holders. So all 6 of these black bulb holders get twisted out, and then you replace the bulbs. There's 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And at the same time, since I had an issue with my oil gauge sending unit, I will be replacing that right hand side gauge. It comes as one piece. It comes with the oil pressure gauge and the battery amp meter. You just have to open up the instrument cluster to get at that, but that's a separate gauge, and that center section is a separate gauge. So this will be the time to change out that oil pressure gauge section. So I replaced all the bulbs already, and just to let you know, taking them out, you turn the black bulb holders counterclockwise, and then they pop out, and they're bulb number 194, a total of 6 of them. Just get pulled out of this holder, and the new one gets put in, and then you put this holder back in the hole, and you turn it clockwise until it clicks in the spot. And that's what you do with all 6 of them. And then also, while I had this whole instrument cluster out, I took off the lens to get at the oil gauge, and I put the needle back where it should be at. I had a faulty sending unit for the oil pressure gauge, and it caused the needle to go all the way around, but now it is back in place. And to take the lens off, it was just these screws that go around the lens cover. They're a 5.5 millimeter screws. So now we're ready to put the instrument panel back in place. The harnesses need to be plugged back in to the back of this instrument panel, and this gear shifting cable needs to be fed through the top of the steering column, which it'll go straight back through there, and then it will drop down into this section, and then it just gets hooked back up. The cable latches onto that lever, which is right there in the middle of the screen, and the bracket portion of the cable is going to go right in the middle of the screen there where that hole is at. The screw goes right back in there to hold that cable bracket in place. And these wiring harnesses are the ones that are going to be plugged back into the back of that instrument panel for the lights and gauges to work. And there is a total of 3 harnesses. And the easiest way to get this gauge, this instrument cluster back in, is if you lay it flat like this and you get it back in this area, you can reattach all the harnesses then underneath it, and at the same time you'll have to feed the gear shift cable back through the center of the steering column, and then it will, you have to use your other hand to grab it from below and bring it back down. But then once you're at this point, you can start tipping it back up into place, the instrument cluster, and you'll be ready to bolt it back down then. So now the gear shift cable is back where it should be. We just have to put the screw back in to hold the harness of that cable where it should be. And the end of the cable, the little loop, is back on the lever above the cable harness mounting location. And now with the instrument panel back in place, we can tighten those 4 screws that hold it in, 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side then. And next is reinstalling the upper dash panel that covers over the instrument panel. We will need to put the 2 harness plugs back in place for the headlights and for the dimmer switch for the instrument panel. And once we get the harness back, those 2 harnesses back on, then there are tabs or pins that line up with the holes that are left in the dash, and it just pushes back on. And then we have the 5 screws that need to go back in, the 3 that go to the top portion, and the 2 that were on the bottom left and right of the steering column. So now it's time to put the lower metal panel back in place before we put the plastic lower panel back in place underneath the steering wheel column. And then we just reattach the 5 screws that hold this in. We've got the 2 down in that bottom corner, 1 up in the upper right hand corner, and then we have these 2 that are on the left center side of that panel to hold it in place. And now it's time to put the lower plastic panel back in place below the steering column. And first we'll have to guide the pins in on the top corners, and also the fasteners get guided in. And then there's a couple screws on the bottom of that plastic panel that need to go in, as well as reattaching the hood latch bracket back onto this bottom panel. And last but not least, we need to put the radio and the decorative plate assembly back in place, plugging in the harnesses and the antenna and the cigarette lighter and the 12-volt accessory port. And the whole reason that this had to come out was because it overlaps the dash panels on the left hand side there that need to come out, and with this radio assembly in place, it blocks it from coming out easily. And with the radio assembly now snapped in place, the final step is putting those last 2 screws to hold that whole assembly in place back in. And then you'll be done and be able to test out the lights and all that. And now it's time to hook up the positive and the negative back on the battery. And that's it. And now the finished product is the oil gauge is working properly again. And the lights have been repaired, or replaced. And they are working as well, and be able to see it even better at night. But I can see that the lights are on when I couldn't see them on before.